Then, so if we are ready, then yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you for giving me this opportunity to show the community some information about the IxTheo authority search. It has been a feature that we implemented now over the last few months, and we were able to put it live around 2 weeks ago. So you can also feel free to go to ixtheo.de and try it out if you like. Yeah, and as I wrote in the abstract, I'm not only showing you the new feature and all of its parts, but also providing you some information from a developer's perspective about some pitfalls that we had as well. So the IxTheo authority search is based on the VuFind authority index, which is also part of VuFind. But if you have a closer look at all the files, then you will find out very soon that, yeah, it's I think not very implemented in detail. So, for example, if you look at the markouth properties file, you see a comment saying that there are just artificial examples here, and yeah, that these need to be replaced, of course. And if you look at the configuration, then you also have the authority INI file, which is kind of a combination of other configuration files. So I think it's pretty much in a kind of a beta state. That's what I would say. Yeah, so of course, what we did was to extend the index and also customize lots of the fields, extend the fields, and I'm going to give you an overview over that. So first of all, this is an international presentation, so many of you might not know that in Germany there's a so-called GND, which is a gemeinsame Normdatei. In English, we would say it's an integrated authority file. And this is provided by and hosted by the German National Library and all the library compounds in Germany. So that's like the data, where our data source for our authority index. And this GND does not only contain information about persons, corporations, and conferences, also conferences proceedings, which is like the main part of it that we have been focusing on for our implementation, but also other standardized data like keywords, locations, and other things that we are also using as part of the title index, but is not part of the authority search right now. Might be part of it later, but right now we focused more on the persons and corporations conferences. So the GND has its own ID system, and if we speak about the ID of the GND, then we often refer to it as the GND number. So just to give you some hints about the basics, this is like the top of our authority page right now. Some information like born is also part of the standard, but we extended lots of it, like we also added the occupation. And as you can see, this also gets translated if a translation is available. So we have like a custom Solr plugin that takes a different Solr field based on the language that is selected in the front end, and we can translate if it's available. And the facet, of course, also gets translated. Then we also added some personal relations, which might be links to other persons like the brothers, sisters, fathers, and so on. But also sometimes co-authors can be listed here, and there will be a link directly to them if they are contained inside of the authority index as well, which is not always the case. Then next we have some corporate relations, for example, memberships in organizations, but also here jobs or other things that have been associated to the author over the years. We have geographical relations like birthplace, activity place, death place if the author is no longer alive, and the country. Then we have biographical references, which is pretty much a person-related external link section, for example, to the GND itself, but also to Wikidata, Wikipedia, and other ID-based systems if we have them, like we can provide a link to ORCID, to ISNI, to VIAF, and other databases. And also we have links to other subsystems, which means that the IxTheo, for example, is hosted on a machine. And we also have RelBib running in a separate instance on the same machine, so we can like link the entry between IxTheo, RelBib, and the others like Index Biblicus. Now, what you see on the right side here is that we also provide an image of the author. This is done via an API lookup from Wikipedia, but we found out that like in our GND, not always the Wikipedia ID or Wikidata ID is present, so we decided to import an entity facts dump and take the Wikidata IDs from there, and then we use a proxy to resolve the pictures, so the pictures will not be indexed or something. They will be dynamically loaded when somebody tries to open the author page. There will be a cache related to that, and also we have like the proxy in between, so it's not the case that the browser directly communicates with Wikidata, but there's a proxy in between. We had to do this due to data protection regulations, so that the IP address of our users is hidden from Wikidata. Then we also have another section in the right, which is also related to external resources, but this time it's not about the person, it's more like titles of that person. So there are around 500 platforms that use a file format called Beacon, so that these platforms provide a export. Like you can import all of these files and parse them for the GND number. And then you can see, for example, here in the file format, you can see for this GND number, the database has like one title. And at the top section, you can also see how you can build up a URL based on the GND number to link to that platform and to the search result. So the Index Theologicus also provides a beacon file, which can be used by anyone. But instead of, parsing all of the 500 beacon files of all the platforms out there, we found out that there is a finding aid API. It's called findbuch.de. It's a German website, and they provide an API, so we can send them a GND number, and they will resolve all of the beacon links for us. And the implementation works kind of similar to the Wikidata image proxy with a JavaScript, Ajax, and a PHP cache in between. Then, of course, from our authority page, we also wanted to link all the titles. So we decided to make a difference between titles by an author and also titles about an author. So by an author, of course, like the primary author. About is more like a secondary author, but also corporate author or even only a keyword. And down here we have a section with related authors, meaning that here you have a chain icon. That means here you can jump directly to a search result that will give you all titles that the author, which belongs to the open page, is like a co-author of the author you see down there. And here you can also jump either to the titles of this author with all of the other authors, or to the author's authority page, if possible. I will tell you some additional information about that soon. Now, from this information, with the titles, keywords, and so on, we also thought it might be a good idea to add in some charts, because it's always a nice thing to do, and it looks pretty nice. So we added two different kinds of charts. On the one hand, a tech cloud based on the keywords, topics, and we used the JQ Cloud library for that one. You see that the tech cloud, where the topics are actually displayed in a different manner based on the frequency. And you can also navigate to the tabs up here to get either an alphabetic list or a list by the popularity, just for the sorting. The second chart we added is something we call the publication timeline. We use chart.js for that one. Here we have our titles by and titles about again in a different color. And here you can see like how the titles and publications developed over all of the decades, which I think is pretty nice. Another feature that we just implemented 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think, or even 2 weeks ago, was that we thought it would be a good idea to see which authors do have the most titles linked to them over the whole index. And yeah, when you sort this like a descending sort, then you find out in IxTheo at least that you have like Martin Luther, the famous reformer who lived like 500 years ago, who has like, I think, over 7,000 titles in IxTheo linked to him. And then, of course, we have like several popes over the last few years, like Benedict XVI, Johannes Paul II, or also Pope Francis, who is the Pope right now, and also a famous saint that has been related to very, very much over hundreds of years, you can say. So we thought this pretty interesting to share with our users. When it comes to title linking, there's something that you need to understand, and something that you might run into when you try to implement something like this by yourself. So of course, from our data source, we take all of the authors that the data source provides. But that doesn't mean that all of our titles are linked in the proper manner to that data source. For example, if you have an author like Martin Luther King Jr., which is like, they're quite a while, it's been active like over 50 years ago, and has been a very popular author. So of course we have an entry in our authority file for him. But it might also be the case that there are some new authors, for example, somebody who is not listed yet in the GND. And we have a title entry from something that will be published sometime next year. So it might be the case that we have titles that are not fully related to a normalized author. So either there is no author entry, or there's a title that doesn't link to the author entry via the GND number. So we just have like the name of the author to be able to look up other titles of the same author. So we had to implement some kind of a hybrid system to use the ID whenever it is existing and we have a normalized author, and to fall back on the headings whenever the ID is not existing and we have a non-normalized author. At some time when we started with the implementation, here on the right side, you can see that we activated some kind of fuzzy logic. And here, for an author called Robert Peter, who we don't know much about him. We do not know when he was born, when he died, if he's still alive, whatever. And then at that point, we were trying to find titles and also the picture based on the name of the author. And of course, it was not the full name of the author. It was like a fuzzy logic. So here we can say that we found like archive material to an author called Peter Robert Hofstadter, and another archive material to an author called Peter Robert Franke. And they have nothing to do with this author. And also, at some point, our Wikidata proxy didn't use IDs. It was just some fuzzy search logic in there. And we said like, okay, give me a Wikidata entry for Robert Peter. And what came out of that was the Wikidata entry of Robbie Williams, which full name is Robert Peter Williams. What I didn't know that far before that. But of course, you can see that fuzzy logic can be really bad. And we want to avoid something like that situation where we have the wrong image shown for an author. So we decided that for some of the features like the image lookup, we're only going by ID and not by the heading. But of course, for example, if you only have the heading and you want to try to link to other titles from the same author, then we use the heading. So it's always kind of yes, you always have to see what are you going to look up, and is a heading okay if you use it as a fallback or not. Another technical aspect that we ran into was the kind of the way that VuFind manages its data about the authors inside of Solr. So inside of the Biblio index, the information is spread around the multiple Solr fields, and like the information needs to have the same ordering so that it's can be fit together later. So there's a part of special functions inside of the inside of the import Java code that is like used to get the information out of the authors. And on the other hand, there's a special function in the record driver that tries to put it all together. And now if you think that you might have some fields that are optional, like the GND number or the ID or whatever, then it might be the case that at some point you have like an ID and at some point you haven't, and then you need to fill it all up with placeholders and also adjust the logic so that it can still put the pieces together later on. So yeah, that was pretty nasty, and we ran into that multiple times. So now we're glad that we got it working, but I'm not sure if it's like the best way to keep this in VuFind anyway, like if you think of it over a long term. Another thing that we ran into was the templates. For example, if you think of the titles, then you have a component called the record data formatter and the record data formatter factory. But in the authority index, we don't have something like that. And we thought about, okay, how will we deal with that? And one of the factors that was pretty important for that was, of course, we wanted to be able to export all of our properties also as schema.org information, so that we can like boost our SEO ranking with bots like Google or other search engines. And if you imagine that you have multiple properties, if you imagine that you have multiple properties and multiple occasions where you want to render the same property, and you have to generate additional HTML, then it is a good approach to centralize that. So what we did was we like moved the logic from the HTML into some kind of view helper. So we have the record driver that's delivering the information from Solar or from Mark. Then we have a layer in between with the view helper that generates HTML for schema.org from the information from the record driver. And then we have the template, which is just like accessing the view helpers to render the HTML. And so, for example, our templates get pretty cleaned up. So this is, for example, the core template. Here you can see for the table, for example, that all of this is basically just linked to the authority view helper that is then delivering the schema.org information. Yeah, and I think this is a pretty nice solution because it keeps the template small and it allows you to reuse lots of your code. And another thing that we had to have a look at was the theming. Of course, we're using these features in multiple of our platforms, IxTheo and RelBib, and also KrimDok, which is not live yet, but we will hopefully put it live like over the next 2 weeks. And same thing also for the charts that need to be adjusted, by the color at least. Okay, now this has been like the core of my presentation, but before I finish, I would like to give you one more slide about the next project that we want to implement, which is based on the authority index. Now basically what we want to do is we want to implement the Green Road Open Access service to allow our users to publish titles, or the full texts rather to an existing title. So what we did was like we implemented admin user functionality, and then next we implemented a possibility for a registered user to claim access on an authority record. So he has like a button when he's logged in, and he can say, okay, I would like to have access for this authority to be able to publish something. Then right now it is like an email that is sent to all the admins, and then they can like in the email they have a link to accept or reject that. And if a user has access to an authority and he goes to a title, then he will be able to start the publishing process for that. So it's still in an alpha status, and the publishing itself is not ready, but we did some preparations. The upload itself then, as I said, the title record must already exist. I think, creating a full-fledged record from An upload form was something that we tried to avoid so far. Maybe we'll provide something like that later. And then he will be able to upload a PDF file and add additional information for the publication, for example, the license. And that what we're planning to do in addition is to pass that PDF file to DSpace7, either via the SOR2 API or via the REST API. Still depends on which one will be better. Right now, we're thinking a bit more about the REST API because it has been reworked in DSpace7 and should work quite nicely. Yeah, and if you're interested more on that, then maybe I can tell you something about that on the next summit next year when we're finished with the implementation. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So thank you for your time and attention. And now we would be able to answer some questions.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions, but I will allow other audience members to ask first before I monopolize things.
Right now, there is nothing to monopolize. So if you wanted to ask a question or two to give people time to formulate and type theirs.
All right. Well, I have two things which I can do, and I'll cut myself short if I start to see things popping in elsewhere. So first of all, to the comment about the problem of parallel fields in the Solr index making it difficult to work with authors. In my experience, that's kind of a limitation of Solr, that it doesn't really give you a way to manage structured data particularly well. So, you know, I think the alternatives are either create parallel fields like that, or else have separate fields for searching and data retrieval, and then stuff some kind of structured object into the retrieval field that you then have to parse out. And both of those solutions feel ugly to me. If anybody knows of a better third approach, I would love to hear about it. And, you know, Solr is always evolving. I can't keep up with it. So maybe there is something new that I don't know about yet that would help us address this. So I'd love to hear about that. And then beyond that, my real question is, do you have plans to contribute some or all of this back to the project? Because I think there are at least some pieces of it that sound like they would be of general use. And, you know, I'd love to work with you on that if you're interested.
Yeah, sure. So for now, I just wanted to show the feature. If there's interest in one or the other, maybe we can share parts of it, depending on, of course, what it is and how much effort it will be. Because I'm not sure, like we, over the time when we implemented it, we started with a certain goal, and then on the way, we changed lots of stuff again, and changed lots of fields again. But if you think that there are parts of it that might be interesting for the community, of course, we can talk about that maybe on the community call then as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I'm thinking things like your work at creating sort of a record data formatter equivalent for authority records, some of the low-level infrastructure stuff. It might be useful to get that into the project so that then what you're building on top of remains stable and we don't end up with competing implementations of some of those lower level parts.
Sure.
I think it also, this is sort of a small side topic, but it raises the question of using libraries for drawing graphs and charts, because I think we do that in at least one place in the existing code. And I'm sure that whatever we're using is absolutely ancient, though I think still maintained, given that it hasn't changed a lot in probably 10 years. So I wonder if there's a need or opportunity for modernization or unification around, you know, things like displaying graphs of release dates of works.
I think it's also always a question of what you try to achieve and what kind of graphs you want to provide. So we were having a look on that by ourselves. And as you see, we had implemented 2 graphs, but we used 2 different libraries, JavaScript libraries for that. And that was just because we had to look at it and see on the one hand, how easy it is to realize it with a library, with a JavaScript library. And on the other hand, of course, always the look and feel of the graphs is very important for the end user. So you might want to use a different different library for one chart or the other, depending on it, how it fulfills your needs or not fulfills your needs. So I'm not sure if implementing one library and said here this is the library for all would really be enough to meet all the requirements out there in the community. That could be pretty difficult.
I absolutely agree, and I don't think there's ever one size that fits all. But if your graph looks exactly like a graph that we're already generating, maybe we can modernize that existing graph. And I see questions are coming now, so I'll shut up.
Okay, so I've seen a question. If the GND is updated, does that solve the issues of matching to a correct person or entity? Yes, but this is it needs two steps. So of course, the GND authorities data source needs to be updated. The author needs to be added. So only then it can be found in the search tab for the Solar auth that we added. And on the other hand, the existing titles must be adjusted so that the link to the GND ID is added to the title. And of course, if you have 500 titles for an author, then either you do that automatically somehow, or it might take a while for a librarian to edit the titles. But then, of course, it is will be shown correctly in the platform. Any more questions right now?
I guess I can also just throw in terms of things that might be worth considering as contributions or generalizations, the image service for authority records. I'd be interested to know if that's architected in such a way that what you've done could be a plugin, and there might be other sources that could be added to that to pull images from other places.
And another question, does this connect at all to an authority database in an ILS? In our custom implementation, not, because we don't have any ILS connected to it right now. We use the no ILS driver. And I think the system that we are using is called ADIS or ADIS, but I don't think that there is a VuFind driver for that right now, but it might be the case that we're soon switching to something different. So evaluations are going on for some years already right now, and there's changing over the time. Maybe we will implement something for the new ILS when we have one. Yeah. Okay, anything else? Is Wikidata ID included in GND automatically? Potentially, yes. So there is a field in the GND for the Wikidata ID, but unfortunately, it's not always maintained for all the data sets. So, but I think there's a link between that's the reason why I said we're using the dump from the entity facts website. I think the entity facts website has the K10 plus ID or any other kind of ID that allows us to assign the entity facts entry with it. Oh, hello. Yeah, so that's why we downloaded the entity facts dump. Then we look up our other ID that we have from the K10 plus, and then we map the Wikidata ID into that, because like the data from the G&D is not really complete in that part. Okay. So I think if there are not any more questions, then thank you very much. And yeah, then I'll just pass the ball back to Damien.